Welcome to Schmidt Talks, a podcast about politics, life, philosophy, and everything in between. My name is Heather Christina Schmidt. I am a mom, a writer, an artist, and a lot of things that are difficult to sum up in just a few words. You've tuned in to season 2 of Schmidt Talks, entitled I'm Here for Now. We'll be doing an analysis of the housing crisis in California and, well, really America and even the world. Make sure to hit subscribe wherever you are catching this episode. That is if you like what you hear. And now for the show. So I remember like it was yesterday. My kids were at a tennis clinic at one of the local clubs. They had played there for years. And while we never joined as members, the club was making a cool $650 a month from us in lessons, clinics, and other fees spread out between my two oldest kids. Two older gentlemen walked out of the clubhouse and they found a seat to watch their grandkids play in the clinic. I continued to sit there reading my book while I waited for my kids, but immediately got distracted when one of them took a phone call and afterwards said, well, that was one of my renters. His roommate moved out and he needs help finding a new one to cover all the costs. He's been good to the place, so I'll help him out this time. He's not like the others. Oh, don't get me started about renters, the other man said. We just had to evict an old bitch after learning she had filed for bankruptcy. The first gentleman asked, did she keep paying? Did she keep paying her rent? He said, yeah, but we don't want those problems. Renters. They're all scum. Just over 45% of California's homes are renter occupied. This group, representing nearly half of all Californians in a state of nearly 40 million people, is seen by at least a fair number of the other half as all scum. A renter myself, I have seen it, the so-called scum, over the years. The vast majority have been people like us, young, middle-class families with not a large enough income or interest, or in our case, both, to buy. Others among the lower class, seniors on a fixed income, people that fell down on their luck or who never, had luck to begin with. Naturally, there are the occasional bad renters you hear about, the people that trash the apartment, leaving holes in the walls and, methamphetamines in the carpets. But for every bad renter story I've heard or seen, I've come across probably 10 times as many who were just average people trying to get by. To be honest, in my 20 years as a renter, I can actually only think of one renter that I knew personally that I would call bad. On the contrary to that, it's usually the landlords that are the bad ones. A friend of mine, a renter, also has run the gamut of horrific renter horror stories over the years that I've known her. This isn't to say she as a landlord had terrible renters, it's to say she's a renter. It is in her own experiences renting from others that have been the stuff of nightmares, verbal abuse. Verbal abuse I've heard. Toilets installed in the hallways, not even in the bathrooms. 20 people crammed into a 4-bedroom home. This is the stuff of renters' nightmares, and people are living it every day. In my own experience as a renter recently, we have had our own fair share of being treated like renter scum. Most often it's been at the hands of predatory property management companies or by slumlords that believe they have absolutely no obligation to provide a livable environment. Since our family received notice in January of 2022 that our tenancy was being terminated, a nice way to say evicted without cause, we have moved twice. The second home we lived in had black toxic mold that was not remediable, with us continuing to live there. Our current home, the third in a year, has shorts in the wiring, so half the electricity doesn't work sometimes. And we live amongst termites. When asked for them to do these routine maintenance items, the property manager and landlord say they can't afford to do it, even though it is their obligation to do so under the law. But what are we going to do about it? Move again? No, we're just among the 18 million Californians that are nothing more than renter scum on the wrong end of this class war. This class war between renters and owners has developed into a crisis of apocalyptic proportions. It is like the battle for Helm's Deep, for lack of a better analogy, in Lord of the Rings. On one side are the unrelenting and opportunistic orcs, the slumlords, the landlords, the property investors. On the other, everything that comprises Middle Earth, renters, the middle class, the working class, just living their lives, many there for different reasons, being attacked. The pejorative attitude that anyone not in the position of owning a home is scum is so pervasive to our culture and our leadership that it has made its way into public policy, profoundly impacting markets, cost of living, quality of life, and a host of other issues, including homelessness. This is to say that homelessness is not as simple as someone being sick or addicted. Rather, the unhoused are a nuanced group of people that have little to no control over their living situation, even in the best of circumstances. Unhoused is a term now frequently used to describe people that are experiencing homelessness in an effort to be more sensitive to a group of people that find themselves on the streets, in encampments and shelters, or in their minivans. And yet it is worth considering that anyone not owning a home in California, or anywhere for that matter, is at least technically unhoused or on the verge of being so. Some might argue that even homeowners are on the verge of being unhoused. You just don't know what will happen today. One of those unhoused individuals recently was in the case of a local journalist, local to me, who only after he moved across the country made public the fact that the cost of living, coupled with stagnant wages and grim conditions of local journalism, led him to choose to live in his Ford Econoline 250 for 2 years. In his poignant and brutally honest piece in Pointer, an online magazine that you can find on pointer.org, he says, "I am one of the thousands of people who have responded to the challenge of living in 21st century America by choosing to become houseless." And this is where the nuance of dealing with homelessness and the class war between owners and landlords must recognize that the issue is not solely one of mental illness or addiction, or of all renters being scum. And in fact, one study out of Los Angeles, the epicenter of California's homelessness crisis, found that roughly 30% of people living on the streets were suffering from serious mental illness or addiction. 30%. While this figure is striking and creates a call to action for leaders across the state that is quickly looking to become even next year's hot button election issue, it largely perpetuates a co-narrative to renters are all scum, that being that homeless are all mentally ill. But what about that 70%? Made up of people like Ian Bradley, that journalist, hundreds of thousands of people, including seniors, couch surfing while waiting on years-long Section 8 waiting lists, people that are living in their RVs and vans over in the Target parking lot, individuals that simply fell down on their luck over the years or had one too many medical bills they could not cover. The list of different types of people that make up that 70% who were not mentally ill or addicted to substances at the time they fell to homelessness Well, the list is long. Although it does not take long for someone that has fallen into homelessness to then start suffering from mental illness or to turn to substances to cope. Can you blame them? When we see people living out of a tent or a trailer, we immediately peg them as sick from the start. We peg their choices as the problem that got them to that place, when the truth is, it is our social structure, it is our dirty politics, and it is our unchecked capitalism that is the problem. Worse yet, no one seems to have much of a solution. Karen Bass became Los Angeles mayor last year and immediately declared a state of emergency over homelessness, followed the next day by caving to NIMBY donors and rejecting housing plans in areas her donors were opposed to new bills. In my own community, we had no one talking about homelessness or housing or the need for housing, the need for affordable housing. No one talked about it at all. People do talk a little bit about wraparound services, but then at the end of the day, politicians and community members that propose them often hit dead ends when it comes to funding, because while people are frustrated with the problem, they simultaneously do not want to agree to any of the solutions. In this news report that I'm going to play here, we see the frustration that is building across the state.
All right, San Diegans are frustrated and horrified at our growing homeless population, but it's not just us.
Yeah, people are finding themselves homeless across the entire state, and experts say it'll take years to get better. CBS 8 political reporter Morgan Reiner breaks down the timeline of what's happening behind the scenes to try and fix us all right now. Morgan?
One homeless organization told me that's the million-dollar question. How long will it take to solve this issue? But the issue wasn't created overnight, and it's not going to be solved overnight. We are in this for the long haul. San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria said two things can be true at the same time.
We've increased shelter capacity in our city by 38%. We've done that largely by utilizing public facilities and properties.
The city is sheltering more homeless individuals, but more people are becoming homeless.
In the city of San Diego, our median rent is somewhere around $2,600 a month for an apartment. You know, it's no surprise if you have rental rates of that nature that you're going to see more folks on the streets.
In part because of the high cost of living and mental health and drug addiction.
People continue to be extremely frustrated. They don't see the progress that they would expect to see with this all hands-on deck effort.
From San Diego to Bakersfield.
We hear from businesses and residents who are experiencing the impact.
To Sacramento.
We saw about a 67% increase.
Statewide poll after poll says the same thing. People are frustrated.
There is no single bullet that's going to solve our problem overnight.
Lisa Bates runs Sacramento Steps Forward. They conduct a point-in-time count for the area. She said solutions are in the works. The governor signed several bills last month that will help streamline the process to build new affordable housing.
From a regulatory standpoint, they've done a lot. But, you know, housing takes time to build, to develop, to site.
Her organization worked with the city and county to come up with a 3-year local plan.
We need to do a lot more on the front end. We need to catch people early and prevent homelessness from occurring.
To address mental health, the governor passed Care Court to compel those with severe mental illness into treatment and housing. But again, that won't be implemented statewide for another few years.
We'll start to see the kinds of reductions in on-street visible homelessness amongst the severely mentally ill that I think is the most concerning to Californians.
When Newsom was running for office back in 2017, he pledged to build 3.5 million homes by 2025 because that's what experts predict that we need in order to address the shortage. But we are nowhere near that. Newsom recently admitted that it was a stretch goal. So instead, he changed that goal to 2.5 million homes by 2030. Again, from the local level to the state level, there are dozens of projects in the works, but all of them are going to take time.
The reality is that no timelines will be met until every issue around money and all of our other systemic issues in the state of California are addressed. So everyone knows that California's cost of living is exponentially higher than most other areas of the country, but again, the nuance of it is what largely goes unseen. What makes the cost of living so difficult in the state is that wages have not kept up with the increases in cost of living, causing more Californians to fall into poverty now than at any other point in California's history. Supply and demand of housing has been bottlenecked by special interests and paid off local elected officials, and opportunistic slumlords have been allowed to abuse tenants for far too long, making it virtually impossible for tenants to ever better themselves, always finding themselves stuck in the cycle of moving expenses and lost security deposits. CalMatters reported last year that roughly 7.1 million Californians are now living in poverty as a direct result of the cost of living. This is a staggering 18% of the state's population, and it has certainly only gotten worse through the course ongoing pandemic. To make matters worse, 56% of Californians spend more than half their paychecks on rent alone, with the average housing price in the state coming in at 7 times what the average resident of the state earns. Simply put, the cost of living has far outpaced the growth the average incomes of California stand at today. The state has the highest level of poverty in the nation and the second highest level of homelessness. Both of these figures, though, are attenuated to wages as compared to the cost of living. This is to say that while incomes are generally higher in California because living costs disproportionately more, poverty is a condition presented to a far larger group of people simply because everything costs so much. Pre-pandemic, roughly 1/3 of Californians lived at or below the poverty line. Today, more than 1/3 of Californians make $16 an hour, a wage that may seem high to people in other parts of the country, though is abysmal when you consider that our cost of living is between 4 and 12% higher than any other state in the nation. In my own county, ranked as one of the least affordable rental markets in California, renting a 2-bedroom apartment comes in averaging $38 per hour, meaning that a minimum of 2.4 jobs is required to just meet that need. The city I live in, the average job makes minimum wage, while the average home price now tops $800,000. Wages, of course, haven't done anything to impact the housing market. The rising cost of living is no problem for people that have the security of a fixed mortgage or an investment that pays for itself. With 55% of Californians owning at least one home, the rest are owned by private investors, property management companies, and big corporations looking to make money off the misfortunes of others. Homeowners and investors alike have only made the problem worse by playing games, flipping homes for profit, while at the same time influencing public policy to shackle developments from driving down rents by creating a more competitive market for renters. Just over half the state making life increasingly more difficult for the other half. And again, the pandemic only accentuated this problem, with the working class suffering catastrophic wage losses, household wage earners dying from COVID, and upper middle and upper class workers fanning out away from urban areas, gobbling up properties with their newfound ability to work remotely. And yet policy has not effectively caught up with this apocalyptic crisis at the speed with which it is needed to fix the problem. California is not in a housing crisis. We are in a housing apocalypse. The issue is not as simple as one issue as we see, it is many. While many reporters have argued against conflating them all, I argue that conflation of them is critical to understand how they beget each other and how it has reached apocalyptic proportions. More than 150,000 unhoused individuals living in tents on sidewalks is in large part due to the general unavailability of adequate housing per capita. Similarly, The cyclical de-evolution of millions of Californians falling into dire straits and eventual poverty is a result of the unmediated cost of living, stagnant wage policy, and a predatory property management and real estate market. I originally published parts of this episode as a blog post, a written one. Since then, an enormous amount of things have changed for my own part in the housing crisis, and that, in the end, is the crux of the situation with housing today in 2023. There is no security in it. It is constantly changing. All of it. Everyone is, in some way, shape, or form, unhoused. There is no such thing anymore as settling down. Even when you've purchased a home, so much can go wrong. I think this is because the housing crisis, a reality across California, America, and much of the world, while very real, also acts as a metaphor for the way the world is today and the class war we are living. Whether we each as individuals have accepted that or not, there is a them and there is an us. Each episode of this season will examine different aspects of the housing crisis and ways it could be solved. Some episodes will share more of my own experiences and those of others. And in the end, we will understand that housing today is fleeting. It is ephemeral. Today I am here. Tomorrow, who knows? You've been listening to Schmidt Talks, a podcast about politics, life, philosophy, and everything in between. Make sure to hit subscribe wherever you're catching this episode and connect with me on your social media channels of choice. As always, thanks for listening and stay safe.